when we are leading instead first with engagement and then coming in a more surgical way to conduct enforcement actions when there are problematic activities.
We begin our show there with Seattle City Council member Andrew Lewis, once again, talking about our city's homelessness response efforts. Those efforts really put to the test with a recent sweep of Denny Park in his district. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about legal protection for tenants facing eviction and a whole lot more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. My co-host, who writes furiously but tries to approach life calmly, is Kevin Schofield from Seattle City Council Insight. Hello to you, sir.
I am doing my best Zen master impression today.
Do what you
Can't
can,
you tell?
man.
Can't you see the whole Zen aura?
It's working. It's working. It's working. I feel it. I feel it from here. We always thank City Grind Espresso too, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. Please do support them and other small businesses. Thanks also to our patrons. Voss has joined us this week at the $10 level. A special Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug is heading to Voss. And our mugshot of the week. Kevin, I don't think we can top what happened last week with patron Eric sending in the chickens eating out of the mug in his yard. That was incredible. But this week we have a springtime photo from our patron Krista with a daffodil inside the mug. Aw, insert here. 'Tis the season definitely for that. Thank you for sending in your photos, everybody. You want to be featured on the show, send in a photo, extra credit for creativity. And when you do that, sending it at the $10 level, becoming a patron here, we will send you a mug. So please do become a patron. We are asking you to do that if you can. We need your support, and we definitely appreciate it. A big thanks to Converge Media, too. They run the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel every Wednesday night at 7. Let's roll with right here, right now. All right, it's the second week of March. Not a ton on the Seattle City Council's agenda for this week, but an important vote on transportation funding we've been following. So the city had saved up $23.7 million to deal with I-976, the car tab measure from last fall. That was if it had passed. It didn't pass, so now there are some one-time funds to spread around. Two things to consider here. I'm going to get back to car tabs in just a minute, but Kevin, the council is talking about spending a good portion of these funds on transit, some crosswalk improvements, keeping a small portion in reserve too. Your thoughts about what the council is trying to do here?
Well, so first of all, we have to recognize that the limits, since these are, transportation benefit district funds that came from the prior one that just expired,
right?
Not the new one that just got approved,
right? Thank you.
There are limits underneath that, the voter approved benefit district that say what the money can be used for,
right?
So $5 million is going to go to Metro Transit Service. About $10 million is going to go to various transit corridor improvements across, rapid ride lines and some of the other really, high volume bus lines in the city. About $650,000 to signal improvements for a couple of intersections, including the sort of the big one, Market 15th in Ballard. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, these are one-time funds, right? Yeah. So, a lot of the money is going to go to one-time expenses. Yeah. That's why a lot of it goes into capital improvements.
Sure. Yeah. So we wouldn't see something along the lines of bridge repair or whatever else. That's something else entirely here.
You could, and I believe there are some provisions in the transportation benefit district to use for things, capital improvements like bridge repair. Mm-hmm. But again, they have to follow the letter of the law, right, as opposed to what the voters approved.
Right. I wanted to jump back to car tabs real quick though, because I-976 was struck down. The voter-approved Seattle Transportation Benefit District allows the council to actually add on some car tab fees to a certain point without a public vote. And this is an important piece here. The council is discussing this right now, a new $20 vehicle license fee, or VLF, and they say they'll have a plan about this by the start of next month. What's going on with this, Kevin?
Yeah, so it's actually that is outside the Transportation Benefit District. That's under state law. The city council has the ability to do that. Okay, a certain dollar amount of, and I think it's a certain dollar amount of vehicle license fee.
Right.
And they've, in this past fall and doing the 2021 budget, they came close to maxing that out.
Right.
Just without having to go to the voters to do that. In part because of their very conservative approach to the renewal of the transportation benefit district, because at that point, I-9076 had not been thrown out by the court yet. So
so there was concern over car tabs.
They didn't know what they could really do, so they just played it super conservative on that.
Yes.
And stayed within, what they would be able to do if 976 had been sustained.
Yeah, just had that sales tax piece.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, when Councilmember Peterson, who chairs the transportation committee for the council, brought this forward to be passed, he said, look, this really needs to go to bridge maintenance, because that's a place where we are underfunding every year. Annually, we should be spending by millions and millions of dollars, in fact, tens of millions of dollars. And we have, tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars at this point, of accumulated back spend we need to do on maintenance, right? So we're in a deep, deep hole on that. And the other council members, a couple of them, including Councilmember Herbold, said, yeah, that's right, we need to do that. Obviously, Councilmember Herbold is very concerned about the West Seattle Bridge
in her district.
That is forefront of her mind, and she wants to make sure that we don't create that problem in other places too. The other council members weren't really on board. They're like, well, let's go get some community input, see what advocacy groups and everybody else says about this, and then come back and we'll look at what to do. So they were non-committal about how they wanted to spend the money. And unfortunately, to your point, you said earlier, they're going to come back in another week or two. South's going to come back and say, okay, this is what we heard. But, it's probably not going to put a lot of money into maintenance, because maintenance is just not sexy.
Right? I always hear that, but
it's not visible.
It is until a bridge starts falling down.
It's not. Lack of maintenance is visible. Maintenance is not, visible. Right. And so, people are like, well, I want more bike lanes, right? I want, better, freight corridors. I want, better sidewalks and better, pedestrian crossings, and things like more crosswalks. And, that's going to be the stuff that voters get excited about. And not about bridge maintenance and nobody sees. So it's always really, really hard to get money for bridge maintenance.
Right. Well, we're going to keep tracking what's going on with this vehicle license fee in the Transportation Committee later on this month. Also tracking some surveillance impact reports in that commission. Very interesting stuff going on there. We're going to move on to that in a little bit, but let's shift right now to something else happening this week here. Seattle's hotel worker healthcare mandate back in court this week. Some background to begin here. I'll try my best here, Kevin, to get us through the weeds, and I'm going to have you pull us out when you can. But so voters approved the hotel worker protection measure. This is I-124 in 2016. It was challenged in court. The city rescinded it a few years later and replaced it with 4 bills that the council passed. But ERIC, now that's the acronym of the employee rights group that sued the first time along here when this was first passed by the public here, back again. They have a lawsuit specific to the healthcare mandate that the city passed a few years ago. Kevin, I talk about this. You've been tracking it like a champ on SCC Insight, and I just wanted to know about this lawsuit that is challenging the city. What's going on there, and what's the city's defense?
Right. So a couple of things. First of all, they, just to be clear, why they rescinded it. And passed 4 bills. The I-124 was challenged in court because they said it violated the single subject rule. It talked about too many subjects. So and they were going to lose. 4 at that point. They were clearly going to lose this. It was like pending before the Supreme Court, and they were going to lose. So the council basically cut that short and said, we're going to rescind it. We're going to break it up into 4 bills. We're going to pass it as 4 separate bills, and that way that whole issue goes away. And they did that.
However,
ERIC, which is actually not an employee rights group, it's an industry group. It's
that's fair.
The challenge to this thing is that it's preempted by a federal law called ERISA, which is basically around employee benefit packages.
The Employment Retirement Income Security Act. Keep going.
It's all about employee benefit packages, and basically the federal government, Congress said, it's too crazy for companies to put together benefit packages if they have to customize them for every local and state jurisdiction.
Right.
So we're going to say, no, like Starbucks doesn't have to have a different benefit package for Seattle and Bellevue
as
and
opposed to
State and, Idaho and Montana. And it's like, no, we're not going to ask them to do that. We are going to put in place a set of rules at the federal level, and we're going to preempt state and local jurisdictions from writing their own rules about this, right?
However, Seattle, I think, came at it from this perspective of, this is a health and safety issue. We need to be doing this as a city.
They said a couple of things. That was one of their arguments. One of the arguments is we have, traditional historic police power to regulate health and safety. And they also, made some other sort of claims about, well, this isn't really a benefit package, because what they did was they said, okay, we want the law that they passed says we want employers to spend a minimum amount on health coverage for their employees.
Right.
They can do it by paying for health insurance.
Yeah.
They can do it by payments into on a company's self-insurance program, or they can just pay money directly.
Yeah, pay them cash, right?
And the third one, which is actually is referred to as option one in the lawsuit, that was their out card. They said that has nothing to do with a benefit package. The other two clearly do, but that doesn't. So if all the employers did that, this would have nothing to do with benefit packages, and therefore it's not preempted by ERISA.
Right. That's
but they made a couple mistakes along the way that Eric is really pushing hard on, and one of them is they said, well, so the amount you have to pay, it's not based upon the number of hours you work. And they modeled this whole thing based on a San Francisco bill that the Ninth Circuit Court has already said, yeah, we're good with that. It's perfectly fine. The Ninth Circuit one said, yeah, you can pay into a city healthcare program, right, that will provide healthcare to any low-income person in the city.
Yeah.
And the amount you pay in is based upon the hours worked of your employees. What Seattle did in their bill was they said, we're going to base it upon your family size.
I see.
Do you have a partner? Do you have dependents? And Eric said, hey, look, nobody bases, wages. Cities arguing this is wages. It's not a benefit package, but nobody bases wages on your family size. And in fact, under state law,
you can't do that.
It's illegal to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So this is clearly not wages. And oh, by the way, that means we have to put in place a whole plan and program to track the number of family members that you have, and to track, waivers if you decide to waive it because you're getting insurance for your partner.
Right.
All this stuff. So this is in fact a plan. Right.
Yeah.
We have to implement this entire thing and put a whole bunch of bureaucratic stuff in place. And and it's a pretty compelling argument. The city won at the district court level. So now it's up at the appeals court level. And they just had argument last week about that. And, Eric has, in every iteration, they sharpen this argument. They get better. It's hard to say how the appeals court will rule on this. And, this one may go up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, right. We don't have a great timeline on this case just yet, but we do know the court is set to take it up again on March 8th. So we'll see how that goes. I want to move on to our next segment here. Now hear this. All right, so the Seattle City Council is moving ahead with a plan to provide free legal counsel to renters facing eviction. This is a big deal. The city's eviction moratorium is set to expire at the end of March for residential leases, businesses, nonprofits too, and Councilmember Shama Sawant says those renters need help. Here's what she said last week.
Defend every renter facing eviction who needs help. And we know from evidence that having an attorney present makes all the difference to tenants facing eviction.
So Councilmember Sawant doesn't always have support on the legislation she sponsors, but she does have a co-sponsor this time in Councilmember Andrew Lewis. And the argument, I believe, goes like this, Kevin. Free legal representation, generally around $300 to $500 per household, according to the Housing Justice Project, is the money up front for this legal counsel. This is so the city does not have to deal with bigger future costs like helping people out of homelessness. Do you see it that way, Kevin?
That's certainly part of it, and there are public health aspects of this too, of reducing homelessness.
Yes.
There's lots of arguments for this. There are a couple arguments against it, right?
Okay.
This is different from criminal cases where the government is hauling you into court and charging you with a crime, right? Then you can say, all right, I understand why the government should be providing you for legal counsel for doing that. You have a right to an attorney in that case. In this case, unless the government is the landlord, and sometimes the government is the landlord,
that is the case sometimes.
Then it's basically the government picking a side between two private parties in court. It's
yeah,
like, that's
yeah.
a little weird.
It's
Without
well,
knowing any of the facts of the case, we're going
yeah.
to pick a side in it.
Yeah. Well, I hear what you're saying. I think the disparity, the ACLU has pointed this out, that in these different eviction cases, when they do go to court, 90% of the landlords have an attorney, but 10% of the renters
Right.
do in those
Right.
cases. So there's something going on there.
And that comes back to sort of one of the things that I think is a really strong philosophical argument, in favor of doing this, which is the government decided that the way we handle evictions is through the courts.
Yeah, right.
They didn't have to do that. There's all sorts of other ways, mechanisms they could have put in place to deal with evictions. But they said, we're going to use the regular old courts to do that, right? In which case you can say, all right, if they're going to put it in court where, it's important to have an attorney there, then if that's their choice, it makes total sense to say, hey, let's make sure that everybody has an attorney, and if low-income tenants don't have one, let's we have responsibility to make sure they do that. I think there's a sound argument, philosophical argument for that.
Yeah, and I know when this was moving through committee, Councilmember Peterson was a no vote here. 3-1, it got out of committee there. And Councilmember Peterson has pushed back on a few different levels. He was talking about the ability of potentially the state to help out here. There's a Senate bill rolling through right now, 5160, where the state's working on this too, trying to provide counsel to renters here, an $11 million program, whatever else. How do you see that impacting things, Kevin?
Well, there is certainly one going through the state legislature right now. There are a lot of bills going through the state legislature. Most of them aren't going to make it, right? And, it's a good progressive cause. And there are a lot of people in the state legislature who are concerned about evictions right now and what's going to happen with evictions. So once the eviction moratorium is lifted, so there's a chance it could get through. Is it a good chance? I think it's really hard to say. It's hard to say with really, popular bills right now, whether they're going to get through the legislature right now. It's just, it's kind of the nature of the process right now. So for the city to bet on that, maybe, you could argue maybe they should shelve this for a month and come back. But again, the eviction moratorium at this point is supposed to
wraps up in a couple of weeks.
Wrap up, at the end of March. I think the big issue right now for the city around this is the cost.
Yeah, sure.
They've been funding about $600,000 a year to two different organizations right now to do legal support. Their first estimate right now from the Housing Justice Project, which is run by the County Bar Association, is it would cost about $750,000.
I saw that too. Yeah.
But, I dug into the numbers a little bit of this. I'm not really sure about that. So looking at some of the other cities that have this, Newark,
City of Boulder has one.
Newark, New Jersey, which has got about a population of about 289,000 compared to Seattle, 750,000.
Yeah.
They're spending $750,000 $1 million a year.
Yeah.
Right. San Francisco, which is a little bigger than Seattle. It's about almost 900,000 people. Right. So 880,000, something like that.
Okay.
They are spending close to $10 million a year on this.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. So $750,000 could be really lowballing what this is actually going to cost.
And
it's not just too. Right now they've picked a fixed pot of money and said, we're going to give this to these two organizations, and let them go run this program. Yeah. But now what they're doing with this bill is they're saying there is a right to counsel.
Yeah.
For
everybody,
tenant,
doesn't matter income level or whatever else.
There is no budget limit to what, we will have to spend on this. Right.
Yeah.
And they have no ability at this point to predict how much it's really going to cost. Right. So this is in some ways a blank check. That's an issue. That's going to be an issue. And there is no more additional funding in the bill that Sawant and Lewis are pushing forward on this.
Yeah. We'll keep following up on that, but I did want to follow up on another piece that Councilmember Lewis, we had a bit from him at the top of the show talking about this. Denny Park cleared out last week here. It had a lot of different issues around it. There were some issues with regard to police presence there and crime and whatever else. Finally, we're able to clear it out. The number of people who are actually camping there started declining, but there were a dozen plus tents there when it actually had to be cleared out here. I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Kevin, because Councilmember Lewis seemed to think, okay, we took in all this input. We kind of figured out, okay, let's move in with a scalpel rather than a hammer to try to fix these type of issues. Do you think it worked? Do you think that Denny Park approach worked? Could it work in other situations when there are homeless issues that are connected to crime?
I think at some level, it's hard to distinguish between did it work and are there things we could have done? Are there other approaches that might have been better? And I think this is a case where it's impossible to say whether it worked or not.
Yeah.
But you'd be really hard pressed to find a better approach at this point, given the tools that we have, right? So the city has not been doing a lot of these kinds of sweeps.
Yeah.
Right. The places where they've gone and done it is largely where they have seen criminal activity.
Right.
And as you mentioned before, there's a lot of that in Denny Park. Right?
Yeah.
They have, dozens and dozens of reports and complaints about criminal activity going there.
Yeah.
And you saw just also recently, in the last couple of weeks, in Pioneer Square.
This one baffled me. People were actually using a tent as kind of their center of criminal operations, and police investigated it, and Councilmember Lewis did give them credit for that, but it was so interesting to me. No one was even camping there. It was basically just a front for a criminal operation.
But this is something that happens in the larger encampments. Right?
Yeah.
There was one, up along 99 right next to Woodland Park Zoo, where there was basically criminal activity working out of the an encampment there. We saw some of this in Cal Anderson Park. Right alongside and sort of in the midst. It's a good cover.
When those tents become a cover for that. Wow.
And it's really unfortunate for the homeless people who are living in those places that they get caught up in these kinds of situations with criminal activities. But the city is really
preyed upon too.
That is, and you're right, and they get preyed upon too. So the city has really taken a hard line saying that's the kind of case where we're really going to go in and do this. They spent weeks in this case doing the Hope team and
outreach,
doing outreach in Denny Park to individuals to offer them, shelter, offer them in some cases hotel rooms, and they did get several people out of out of tents in the camp in the park before this, and into alternative shelter. There were still some people who chose not to accept those offers, and in the end got pushed somewhere else. So that that's unfortunate. But the city apparently decided this was just an intolerable situation. They really needed to move in.
Which it seemed like there was this fine line here, Kevin, between I've seen so many people say sweeps, no, never ever do those. I think in this case, the city may have proved the point, and let me know your thoughts here, that in some cases, these sweeps do in some cases need to happen to make sure that a criminal element is not there, giving all these different homeless efforts a bad name. I think that's a piece of this right now.
Yeah. And, there are some sort of on the extreme end advocates who have said never, never, never do sweeps. But when you really talk to them, and I've, had a long conversation. I had a long conversation with Councilmember Morales a while back on this topic, right? Where I interviewed on this and said, look, we have to admit there are in fact some cases where you have to remove one, right? If a tent sets up in the middle of a playground, middle of a school playground. We just that is an intolerable situation. If we have criminal activity like this, which is really causing a problem, right? Including for the other homeless people that are there.
Got to take care of it, protect them, protect everybody.
You actually have to go in and do something about that. And she admitted that. And but then gets down to like, well, then what is the exact protocol that you use for dealing with this? And it comes back again to like, did this work? I don't know if it worked.
Right.
But could you find a better approach than this?
Yeah. Difficult to say.
I think you'd be hard pressed to.
Yeah. That's a good analysis there, Kevin. We're going to keep on talking about a few more issues here facing our city in our final segment. What's next? We got a lot coming up here in Seattle here. We're going to be talking about the home business bill the city council's working on a little bit later on here this month, more developments in getting city vaccination stations set up at Lumen Field and elsewhere, some big news there. But Kevin, I thought this was some really interesting news ahead. Seattle is starting to work on redrawing the boundaries for its 7 city council districts. So the city drew these lines back in 2013 after a public vote about this. But since then, our city has had a lot of growth, and in some districts more than others. So based on 2020 census data, that's what they're working towards here. It's time to redraw those lines because some districts might have less representation per capita than others. Really interesting stuff. I wanted to talk to you about this, Kevin. What do you see happening here as a committee comes together to analyze this and these lines are redrawn?
Yeah, so they've just opened up applications for the redistricting committee, which I think is going to be, it's either 5 or I think it's 7 people
I believe, there are 5 there. There are 2 selected by the council, 2 by the mayor, and then one that's actually selected by that group itself.
It's 5. They then basically hire a redistricting master, somebody who has experience in doing nonpartisan, sort of remapping. And there are rules in the city law that came out of the voter approved initiative that caused a whole switch to district-based elections for 7 of the 9 positions on the city council. That say that the population doesn't have to be perfectly equal in all 7,
but it's got to be close.
But the smallest one can't be more than 1% smaller than the biggest one.
Right.
In
so
terms
of try
population,
to have some parity there.
So we're all, there's been, since that was rolled out, there's been enormous growth in the city over the last, 5, 6, 7 years.
Downtown, especially, that one went way up. And how do you rejigger that?
That's going to be Capitol Hill, right? We added a lot of density in a couple of districts, right? So, and in fact, District 5 grew a lot.
North side, for sure.
But at the same time, nobody's really sure what happened over the last year.
Right. In terms of people moving out, COVID, et cetera.
We've seen, the data has shown that a lot of people moved out of the denser areas of the city. To some of the less dense area of the city, some people out of the city altogether. There was a lot fewer people moving into the denser areas. And so nobody's really done the math yet on that, and we're waiting for the 2020 census data. Which
probably has some impacts from COVID too, I would imagine.
And there'll be some impacts from COVID to that too. So the official counts for the districts are going to be the census data. And then the master is going to have to come figure out how to redraw the lines. Now, the law says they have to respect geographic boundaries. Where possible, they shouldn't be changing district boundaries. So it's going to be looking at, okay, where can we make
Where's that
small,
fine line of the international district? Right.
But try not to break up neighborhoods. And we'll see what they come up with.
That's going to be really interesting. You can't be an elected official or a lobbyist. We're going to watch that commission come together here over the next couple of weeks, and I can't wait. That's going to be a really interesting discussion here. We always like to wrap up our show with a taste of what's good to have during our coffee break. Kevin has inspired my daughters to do a lot of baking, so that's why I'm slightly larger than Kevin, in case you were asking that at home. And this week, I have a new twist on an old treat. Kevin, I wanted you to check this one out because what I have before me is a miso ginger chocolate chip cookie. A lot of good cracking on that. And miso is basically fermented soybean paste. And so what my daughter did was sub that in for a good amount of the butter and salt, because this thing is super salty. But you sub that in, and what you get is this very dense cookie that has so many more interesting flavors to it. Your whole idea of substituting, it really paid off here. Thank you.
So, in school, we were all taught, that there are 4 taste areas.
Right.
Sweet, sour, salty, and bitter.
Right? But they forgot.
And since then, they've sort of discovered this other one, whole other area of the tongue they didn't know about. And it's, it's either called savory, often it's called umami.
Yes, the umami is where I was
Asian
going with it.
For it, right? And so, adding the soy miso tends to add a lot of umami. So it basically just inspires a whole area of your tongue and a whole taste sensation that would otherwise sort of not be in there.
Umami dearest. I can't get enough of this. I'm thinking of new cookie names right as they come my way.
I like that one. I like that.
I'll see what I can do.
See what your daughter thinks of that one. Yeah.
We'll see what we can do on that one. Kevin, I thank you always for your insights on these things, my man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you also to all of our patrons. Please do support us on Patreon if you can. We're asking people to jump in at the $10 level so you can get yourself your very own Seattle News, Views and Brews coffee mug. Look out. There's some good stuff there, and we'll feature your mugshot on the show if you send a photo or some video. Thanks, everybody, for listening to Seattle News, Views and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen. Again, please support us on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. Really helps keep things afloat here. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media, and we will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2000.